Hey everyone, I'm Leo.
I'm Frank.
And welcome to a brand new episode of
Terror Recollect.
Yes!
Hey everyone, welcome back to Terror Recollect. As always, thank you for watching and thanks for being a part of this.
Absolutely.
We've come a long way. This is episode 8.
Episode 8.
Yeah.
It's been a great ride so far.
It has. And today we are going to be talking about a subject that's it's a touchy subject.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's very tough.
It's a tough subject.
And that is remakes and reboots.
And what defines a remake and what defines a reboot?
To be honest, we don't even know.
We don't even know.
That's something we're going to try to figure out.
Yeah, as we were kind of prepping for this, we were kind of going over what would be considered the basics. What is this and what is that? And we were having a hard time with it. So let's dive into this. Frank, what would you, as of right now, what would you define what a reboot is and what would you define what a remake is?
I personally would define a remake as something that's scene for scene, sometimes even word for word, the exact same as the original one. Let's see, an example of that would probably be like Hills Have Eyes.
Hills Have Eyes was very, very close to the original.
Or Psycho.
That one was, the Gus Van Sant Psycho is, I think it was made specifically like frame for frame, shot for shot. I mean, just everything was identical on purpose. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the few, if not maybe the only, that is that close to being such an exact. I mean, you could probably play the two movies side by side, and it'd be ironic how close they are.
Yeah. And then reboot, I would consider basically something that's has the same overall concept or plot, maybe a couple of the same character names. Like that, I would consider maybe. What would you consider a reboot?
What about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 2003 Jessica Biel version?
Yeah, that would be a reboot. It's basically the same thing with the road trip and all that, the family, etc. Except it's a lot different in a way. It's probably, I'd say, about like.
And see, that's a tough one already to kind of start off with because I've always seen it as a remake. But if you think about it, everything is substituted. So you still have a group of people in a van driving in Texas, 2 males, 2 females, and none of them are called the names from the original Texas Chainsaw. It's Kemper, it's Pepper. What's Jessica Biel's character's name?
Aaron.
And then in the original, it's let's see what that is. Pam, Kirk, Leatherface. No way. The other 2 guys.
Yeah.
Jerry's the guy who's driving, and Franklin, the guy in the wheelchair. So there's nobody in a wheelchair.
Right.
And then when they do come up with a hitchhiker, the hitchhiker
totally different.
Is a female.
Right. And it's not
it's not a member. Well, okay, spoilers.
Yeah,
it's not a member of the family. It's actually a victim who is trying to escape.
Yeah.
So, I would say, gray area is not my term yet. Technically, he came up with the term gray area. Gray area reboot.
Yeah.
Because as a remake, it doesn't exist in the realms of the remake because the characters are not named the same.
So, I mean, and then, like you said, you mentioned the hitchhiker. A lot of things are the same. It's just twisted.
Yeah.
You have, I think there's only really like one kill that's basically the same or one scene, and that's where he with the hammer to Kemper, and then he slams the door. Yeah. It's shot a little bit differently.
And it's almost like homage scenes, because a lot of stuff in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre was implied violence, but technically it's not a very bloody film. Right. And this one went the complete opposite and went extremely gory. I think that the concept is the same. Leatherface is actually played 2 totally different ways. Yeah. Because in the original, Gunnar Hansen played him. In his words, he said he had gone to a place where a home for retarded persons, and he saw how they walked around and how they moved, Andrew Bernarski
Yeah.
doesn't at all play him that way. He plays him like a pissed off guy with a skin condition. I think is what they ended up implying why he has to wear the mask. So yeah, I would say this is a reboot because it's not remaking it, unless one sees a remake as making it in a completely different way but using the same rules.
Yeah. Granted, they're crazy, but
I'm seeing this more as I don't know. I don't want to be definitive yet because I have in my head what I consider a reboot, and I have in my head what I consider a remake. So we'll maybe touch back on Texas Chainsaw for a second, but I want to give you what I think in my head, or at least for the longest time, what I've considered a reboot and what I've considered a remake. I think when I think of remake, it's like what Frank said. I think of Psycho, the Gus Van Sant 1998, something like that movie, because it's shot for shot. Hills Have Eyes is another great example, but I think a lot of remakes try not to do that, so they end up kind of reinventing the wheel a little bit. But I always saw a reboot as in it's the same series of people. In fact, going off genre a second, people don't usually hear it in these terms, but the Fast and Furious franchise, they actually consider Fast and Furious, the fourth movie, the one that happens after Tokyo Drift. If some of you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't blame you. But they consider that a reboot. Because they say, even when you hear the cast talk about it, when we rebooted the franchise, meaning it's the same franchise, but kind of like a phone when it doesn't function, or a computer, you power it off, you remove all power from it, and allow it to go back to its root instinct of programming. And that's essentially what brought it back, because part 2 didn't have any of the cast except for Paul Walker, and part 3 didn't have any of the cast. And then 4 rebooted it. So I think that's what I've always thought of when it comes to reboots, is the same lineage of film, but redone, restarted. And then in the conversation Frank and I had briefly before we started rolling, I realized that the line between reboot and remake is way more gray than I ever thought it was.
So, like, would you consider, since you mentioned, the example is Tokyo Drift and Fast Furious 4, would you consider Halloween 4 as a reboot?
In the same way H2O rebooted yet again.
Yeah.
And yet again last year, where's the tape?
Right here.
Yet again last year, they rebooted yet again, eliminating Halloween 2 from the lineage.
All of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, Halloween H2O at least contained Halloween 1 and Halloween 2.
Right.
This version, which has Jamie Lee Curtis, went even further back and saying only the first one happened.
Right.
So maybe this is, I think at this point we're just going to have to speak in theory and not be definitive.
Right.
I would say that is a reboot. And H2O was a reboot. Zombie version was a remake. At least the first one was. Part 2 was kind of his own story based around his universe that he created.
I would say, obviously, his first movie would probably be like in that gray area. It's like 80% the same, or 75% the same.
A lot of the characters have the same names.
Yeah.
Lori, the parents, Annie, Linda. But the scenarios are quite different because they wanted to Rob Zombie it a bit and kind of have it be a bit more grotesque.
Yeah.
And a bit more...
NC-17-ish.
Yeah. When you do a remake, you have to one up them, I guess, when they make these. So the Jackie Earle Haley version is a bit more intense than the Robert Englund Freddy. The Andrew Bernarski Leatherface is more intense, and the Tyler Mane version is more intense. I haven't seen the new Child's Play yet. I don't know how that version of Chucky is, but I don't know. We'll see. But speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street, that would actually be a good way of transitioning to what our thoughts are on the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, remake. What do you think it is? Reboot or remake?
Man, see, again, it's hard. A lot of the key moments from the original one with Tina's death and things like that, I would consider it a reboot. I would consider it like a loose reboot because it's the same central plot. But see, a couple of the characters are the same. Tina and Nancy.
And see, this is where I will, not to interrupt you, but this is where I will say it's a remake. It's not a one-for-one. And they have Nancy, they have Tina. A couple of the other characters are new, though.
But
Quentin is new.
Yeah. I can't remember all the names.
What is it? A reboot or nah.
No, remake.
I'd say remake still.
No,
I'd say gray area remake. No,
okay.
I don't know.
But a remake is I consider on the spectrum. I consider a remake as close as the original as possible. A reboot as far away from the original as possible. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Remake with Psycho.
I think at this point we can just theorize.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I like about this conversation is that it is so. It really is questioning what it is that. What is it? I honestly don't know at this point.
Because, like, to me, when you mentioned the Fast and Furious example, I don't consider it a reboot personally. I consider it because it's still following the characters from the original one. It's still continuing their story.
Right.
I would consider it a sequel, just like Halloween 4 is continuing the Michael Myers, the Dr. Loomis, and Laurie Strode sort of. It's still continuing that same story. If it wasn't continuing it and starting up a whole new story.
Okay, so then that's a good point then. So then I would almost then say Halloween 4 is a reboot of sorts in the sense where they are recuperating from Halloween 3,
right.
But she's still, Laurie as a character is still in it.
Yeah.
And they still calculate what happened on Halloween 1 and 2 all the way through until like Halloween 6.
Yeah.
So then maybe in the Halloween series, the first true reboot was H2O. That was the first one to eliminate 3, 4, 5, and 6.
To eliminate any, okay, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
right. For eliminating
4 is a
three, but it's still a sequel. I mean, 4, you can forgive it for eliminating.
You can because that is so far beyond.
But to eliminate stuff that was so crucial to the story, 4, 5, and 6. That's 3 movies worth of.
Especially people who are big fans of Halloween 4 and 5 and Jamie Lloyd character arc.
Yeah.
It is kind of like, come on, man. Like, how are you going to say she doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And then now John Strode is the new son and none of the other stuff. And plus, you still had Donald Pleasance as Loomis.
Yeah, so he's still a consistent connection to those ones that you're forgetting. Yeah. So it's hard,
I think by the end of this, we'll either have absolutely no definition as to what a reboot and a remake
on that one.
or we will have maybe some version of a clearer definition of what these are. The kills are more big budget. Yeah. Maybe a little bit of CD edition, but they were done on a much grander scale. And that made me really like. Again, this is the areas where I like this movie. And Jackie Earle Haley was so good as Rorschach in The Watchmen. I'm like, what else can this guy do?
Yeah, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
But you went through 7 movies with Robert Englund as your man, like as Freddy. And it's hard to make that transition. You go into that kind of like the It, mentality where nobody's going to touch Tim Curry as Pennywise. Nobody's going to touch Robert Englund. And he brings his own thing to it.
For sure.
And he's still awesome, but he never makes like one joke in this entire movie.
No,
he's
still
dead
straightforward.
Serious. Yeah.
He's dead serious in this movie. Which can be good because it differentiates him from the Robert Englund one, but you've got people who have grown up with Robert Englund. It wasn't like Jason where different actors played him. It was one guy with a very powerful personality. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, it's now not that guy, it's this guy. It's like... The Halloween 2018 version, which I still don't know what to call it, Halloween 18. I was curious how the new guy was going to do. Yeah. I met him before I'd ever even seen the movie because we were part of the Halloween 40th anniversary convention. Super cool guy. I got like chills meeting him. I'd only ever seen him in the trailers, but just knowing he was Michael was freaking cool. But then I saw him and I'm just like, I like what he's bringing. It's slightly different, but you can't do that with Freddy. No. With Freddy, he's so defined in your mind as Robert Englund. His stance, his laugh, his personality. So you can't really do it with any other characters. But this still doesn't answer the question as to what exactly is a reboot and what exactly is a remake. I think I'm getting more confused as I go on. So why don't you look up real quick on your phone what Google says that a remake is and what Google defines as a reboot. Because one of the things we have to remember too is a lot of these are industry terms. A lot of these are how they market a movie And I think what they want to do is they want to throw a confusing word out there like reboot, remake, reimagining is another term. But what do you...
Okay, so right here, just the first thing I looked up was it says, a remake honors its source material and does its best to pay homage to it. A remake can mean a modernization in visual or cinematic style, social relevance, dialogue, or theme. It can add a director's unique vision to a project, or it can mean a cultural purpose to appeal to a mass Western audience. Reboot indicates a complete overhaul of the source material, a reimagining, reconceptualization into a franchise. The new material may be vastly different. The new material may be vastly different from the original material that only the title remains. A reboot may maintain some or all of the character names, plot elements, themes, setting, and storylines, but a reboot is basically starting from scratch.
See, not that I disagree with that, but that's not at all what I, in my head, have thought of what a reboot and a remake is. And I think even our viewers, the two of you that have been with us since day one, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what have you seen as what do you define as a reboot? What do you define as a remake? I kind of agree with that. I don't know how much of that I would say is exactly how I feel, but it kind of makes sense. I don't know. What other examples would you give of... We have some examples here in VHS form of certain reboots and remakes and such, or originals and stuff. Since it's something that came out not that long ago, what were your thoughts on the Pet Sematary?
I thought it was dire. Horse manure. Because we're PG here. I can't say.
Yeah, the other thing that's not manure.
I loved the original one. It was one of the most terrifying films I've ever seen. To this day, it still gives me the creeps in certain scenes. I thought they changed up so much, especially the main. I mean, if you haven't seen it already, it's not a spoiler, but they changed up the whole which kid gets killed and comes back. And the original one, it was the little boy Gage, and this one, it's the older sister. The filmmakers said they did it because an older child can be more verbal and interact with them, and when she's back from the dead. So she can do more basically as the zombie version.
I had heard that myself, but spoilers, maybe?
Yeah.
I guess spoilers. All right, entering spoiler territory. Turn your head or whatever if you don't want to hear
Turn
spoilers.
your head.
Turn your head and cough if you don't want to hear spoilers. I thought that was probably one of the worst things because it's like she was saying things like, am I dead?
Yeah.
What's going on here? And like normal tone of voice, the same cadence that she spoke in before, but... one of her eyes was slightly down, and same thing happened with the cat Church. One of his eyes was slightly down, and it was like, it's not creepier. In fact, it's more ridiculous. You almost take away the disbelief because you're like, well, she's talking exactly the same. She's aware that she was in some place where she's not now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you've over-explained. Having a person who talks over-explains it to the point where you now question the entire suspension of disbelief that you're having while you're viewing this. That's what I didn't like about it. On top of the fact, what makes the first one so terrifying, like he said, in my opinion, is the fact that you almost feel like this is not going to be a horror movie. You feel like this is not a comedy, but maybe like a drama of a family moving to, what was it? It's New England? Or something like that. Maine. Well, moving to Maine. And having this kooky neighbor. I mean, I'm sure if you were to add a laugh track or whatever, it could almost come off as a comedy. Yeah. And in this one, it tries to be sinister with every turn. Yeah. The family arrives. Jun, jun, jun. Mm-hmm. The creepy neighbor. Like when the first time you see the new Judd, which is played by... What's his name?
Trinity Killer.
That guy.
Lithgow.
John Lithgow.
Yeah.
He gives this like menacing look as he goes up to Ellie. And all he does is like, pull out a bee stinger from her leg or something. And it's just like, that's not how you develop characters. That's not how you introduce your character. They're trying to scare you from the very beginning. All it does is it frustrates, especially when it's remaking. I know it's probably remaking the book or based off the book, but you're remaking you're making a film that already exists. So people are going to draw parallels to it. And I the whole time I was missing Fred Gwynne's version of Judd, like, oh, that damn wrong.
That damn wrong. Yeah.
And it's just like, Lithgow's awesome, but...
Yeah, he's like the Jackie Earle Haley. He's a tremendous actor. I love him. But the original Judd, played by...
Fred Gwynne.
Fred Gwynne, yeah. Was just... I mean, if you read the book, he is that character. Mm-hmm. The way it's written in the book, his dialogue, is that he has the same deliverance of those lines, and it's just he was incredible. And but it's one of those things that people are going to draw parallels because it's such a beloved horror film, such a beloved film. But that begs the question, like, why even touch it if it's so great?
Money.
You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I know.
And it actually makes more sense to keep it as Gage, because if the girl is questioning it, this is all that much more for her to process.
Right.
Versus the girl who's questioning it is now no longer the same girl.
Yeah.
So it
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
If she was questioning death. Like
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. What can you think of as another movie to make an example of a reboot or a remake?
Well, one that I wanted to point out is right here, House on Haunted Hill, and that's the remake to that is much different than the original one. Mm-hmm. Same basic plot, but that's it. People get invited to this party, and if they stay the night, they get like a certain amount of money. And the original one, I believe it was basically all like cheesy skeletons dangling, and
I think it's almost you have to see it for the era in which it was made.
Yeah.
It almost plays like a TV show where there's not a whole lot of spectacle.
Yeah.
It's not this big budgeted movie.
At all.
I think the intro is probably the most big budget portion because it's that one Frank Lloyd Wright house or something.
We went there
in the Hollywood Hills that we had gone to, and that was kind of big and dramatic. But I mean, it plays like a movie of that era. They weren't these big crane shots. There weren't these things. It was people who were invited to stay overnight at a house and were going to be given money, and you see Vincent Price's character, who's got this very charming, devilish voice, and that's a horrible impression of him. But you don't know if you trust him. You don't know who the good guy is. You don't know who the bad guy is. You don't know what's happening. I actually really like it, but because it is what it is. I mean, if you compare the two, to me, it's apples and oranges. Because they were made in such completely different time frames that I think that House on Haunted, and I loved the remake of House on Haunted Hill. I thought it was great because it was so far removed. It was an absolute update.
Yeah.
But yet this film still exists in its beautiful, pure black and white form in the way that films were creepy in that era.
And it has the was it Sweet Dreams song by Marilyn
Manson? Oh, the Marilyn
Manson
as they're driving up?
Yeah.
Sweet Dreams.
Oh, and Chris Kattan's in it. He plays Pritchett.
What the heck is Chris Kattan?
Chris Kattan from Night of the Roxbury.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
I totally forgot about him, yeah. Pritchett. I own the house.
Yeah.
He's a little weasel, just wants his money. That's all he wants.
That's a good movie. That's another great example. I think another thing, too, since we've got one series that we kind of dabbled into and we're still trying to figure things out was the Halloween series.
Yeah.
So let's see, Halloween 1, classic. Halloween 2 connected to Halloween 1. Halloween 3 has nothing to do with the series. Nothing to do with Michael Myers, I should say. 4 is a sequel. It's not really a reboot.
Yeah, it's a sequel.
I take back what I said previously because we're still trying to figure this out. Halloween 4 is a sequel.
It continues on the story.
1 and 2 is part of the root of that story. It's just almost like another side of the camp. It's just like how else the story can continue. 6 as well, H2O. I don't know what the term would be, but it's the first movie to ignore 3, 4, and 5, and 6. To me, the definition, not that Frank looked up, but to me, that is a reboot. You're restarting from the same lineage. Yeah. That's, to me, that's what I consider a reboot. So then you have Resurrection, which in a sense kind of ended the original series. It's funny because it rebooted so well
and then it ended
with
so
H2O,
crappy.
and then it just like it kind of.
Yeah.
Still a somewhat entertaining film to some people.
Yeah.
And then you have Zombies version, which is a remake.
Yeah.
Gray area
Gray area,
remake,
loose remake,
updated remake with a lot of story that wasn't in the John Carpenter version. Then you have Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which was a original film based off of his remake, kind of like Texas Chainsaw had a. And that's another good example. Is there's a part of me that almost wishes I could see a Freddy Krueger movie, Jackie Earle Haley, have its own sequel. The same way Tyler Maines had 2 runs at it. You know, there was the remake and then there was the original story. The same thing, Leatherface had a prequel.
Yeah.
You know, but it was still an original story. And there's times I prefer the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning to the other
2003 one.
Absolutely. And then you end up having those 2 movies have pairs. They come in 2s. So I'd actually love to see, even though I haven't seen the new Child's Play, I would love to see the new Child's Play have a second just to see where it would go. And I would love to see Nightmare on Elm Street have a second to see where it would go. That's just me.
He would also like to see another Leprechaun Origins.
Heck no. I hated Leprechaun Origins. I like Leprechaun Returns. That was a fun one. But yeah, in terms of and then Halloween 2018 ignores everything up to Halloween 1. The Evil Dead remake I thought was really good. I mean, there's, again, depends on your definition of what a reboot is and what a remake is, but it's set in the woods. This is a girl who's, I think, there to kick a drug habit, so her friends are there. And then one of the guys discovers the Necronomicon in the basement. It's done very differently. It's got a much more like Hills Have Eyes quality to it. Like it's serious. Like what you're facing is not this goofy thing. It's like this is something serious, and people are seeing things. They're chopping their own arms off with electric knives.
Girl cuts her tongue.
It's something it's hard to watch at times, but it's so well done that to me that's a remake that is along the lines of Night of the Living Dead and House on Haunted Hill that I would say are better than the original. For me.
Yeah, if I had to go back and watch either the original Evil Dead or the remake, I would watch the remake.
Yeah, and I recently rewatched it. I completely forgot why I was watching it, but I just remember going like, wow, this is just, it's well shot, it's well directed, it's well acted. You definitely feel for the characters and their plight. And it's a spectacular movie. There's a lot of spectacle in it.
Because it's been a while since I've seen the original one. I think I only watched it like once.
It's been a long time since I watched the original.
Do you remember why they were at the cabin?
I don't.
Because it wasn't the same reason as the cabin.
It wasn't drug rehab.
I like this one. I like the fact that they were just trying to get her friend away from everything. And
I think that's what works in terms of what they call modernizing it for today's audience.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I hear that term and I'm like, no. Like when they're talking about a Crow remake, that they want to modernize it for today's audience. I'm like, it doesn't need to be modernized.
Right.
Stop. What are you doing? But then I get stuff like that, like modernizing Evil Dead for a modern audience. I'm like, see, that makes sense. You know, this family, it's like a family drama that it's essentially a family drama that is happening in the story. And then you throw this Evil Dead storyline into it. But it was so well done that to me, that one takes along the lines of remake is better than the original. As far as the Carrie remake, well, let me say the Amityville remake first. I don't like the Amityville remake. I think it's funny that they picked Ryan Reynolds as George Lutz. So the original 1970, whatever it was, I forget, 79? Something along there? Something like that. Was based on a book that was based on supposed true events. But everything gets exaggerated. By the time they got to the remake, it was over the top exaggerated. And I still consider it an Amityville movie. And thanks to the new Amityville Awakening, which had a very long delayed release, this makes 10 Amityville movies. So I consider it part of the Amityville
saga, I guess. But it's not a good movie to me.
I enjoyed it. I mean, but then again, it's been. I think I've only seen I've only seen the original one maybe once, and it's probably I didn't see the whole thing, so I don't really have a
Why
great.
would you not finish the movie?
I don't know. I don't know why. I think it was on TV, and maybe I got distracted. I don't know. I don't know why, but I did watch this one. I was working at a movie theater when this came out.
Oh, nice.
So I saw it in there just like on my lunch break, and then I wanted to rewatch the whole movie, so I went there, and I liked it. But then again, I didn't have anything to really compare it to.
There was no context of the previous.
And I was like, oh, this movie's kind of freaky, and coincidentally, you're about to talk about Carrie, which Chloe Moretz is actually in.
Yeah, she's the little girl in this one. Yeah, so that's ironic too that there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
And I think you and I had discussed once in terms of Carrie the remake. I thought it was a good movie. Nowhere near is it anywhere as good as the Sissy Spacek. I don't know if you guys can see that. The Sissy Spacek Carrie movie, which was one of my first horror movies I ever saw, like non-slash movies, like straight up horror movies. I watched it on TV as a kid, didn't even get through the whole thing, I think, because you'd tune in halfway before DVR. And I remember it just being so freaking scary. And then the new one was good, but one of the things I think that we had said is like Chloe Grace Moretz is such a cute girl. No one could ever think of her as an outcast.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I think those are probably even your exact words.
Yeah, I believe
remember talking about that with you, and it's just like
she's an attractive girl, you know, like so. The character's not supposed to be that.
No,
she's supposed to be this outcast, like you said, that no one wants to, you know, push aside and stuff like that.
And Sissy Spacek isn't ugly, but she's not traditional. She's not traditionally pretty.
Right.
You know, she's got very big eyes, and you know, especially the way she plays Carrie is very, you know, like this. So you end up going like, wait a minute, no, what? Those are my final thoughts on movies that I think are worth mentioning. I mean, there's a lot, and there's a lot in terms of reboots. There's Friday the 13th. I may have mentioned that, you know, where the '09 version to me is a reboot. It's not a remake because it doesn't feature any of the elements from the Betsy Palmer very first Friday the 13th. I think it fits in as a sequel, very much the way that the writers have said it fits in as a sequel. I don't know, what other remakes can you think of that maybe not fully discussed, but honorable mentions?
An honorable mention I wanted to do was, well, not because I liked it.
No, these are just honorable mentions.
Fright Night. I'm a you know me, I'm a huge fan.
He was a big Fright Night fan. He's the one who showed it to me for the first time.
Yeah, even in the second movie, Fright Night Part 2. But the remake, I didn't feel that it was there was any need for it. The acting was good. Anton Yelchin.
He was good.
He was good. Charlie Brewster, and there was even a cameo by Chris Sarandon in there that was great. And but it didn't live up to the original one. On Nothing will. And the original one, Peter Vincent was like a TV show host, and this one he's more of like a Chris Angel type Las Vegas attraction, and so in a way it was a modernized version.
Yeah,
you know,
and that's I think now what I'm understanding about the concept of a remake. Of course, it's to make money. Let's not fool each other. It's about making money. Someone owns the rights to something very valuable, and they know calling something a certain recognized title will get a lot of butts in theater seats on opening weekend. And even if it doesn't do well in the second weekend, it made all its money back on the first weekend alone, which is the reason why people make remakes. It's all a business, but...
I also wanted to just throw out there House of Wax, even though I've never seen the original one. That's why I didn't want to, go into detail about it. But I did love that movie, the remake with... Yes, it has Paris Hilton in it, but that's not the reason I like it.
Exactly the reason he likes it.
Her acting is amazing.
Right?
No, but that's just it's a remake that I thought was, it was a good movie. It was a decent movie. The effects were cool. The deaths were cool. Acting was good. So, but I can't go into full detail on it because I haven't seen the original one. So I have no context.
I actually haven't seen either one of those, so I have nothing to say in terms of House of Wax. What would you say now, after having discussed what we've discussed? What is your outlook in terms of what a remake is, or what a reboot is, or all of this?
Honestly, I'm probably more confused now than I was going into it. I wish I could have given you guys an actual decision.
Yeah.
Of what I think this is, or this qualifies as, or whatever. But it's up to interpretation, like you said, and it's going to mean different things to different people, and go from there.
I too am equally as confused as Frank. I don't know. I came into this going, well, yeah, a reboot is something along the same lines. I'll give example. Leprechaun, not Origins, the new one, Leprechaun Returns, is in the same lineage, although it's not Warwick Davis playing him. It's a follow-up to the first one. It has Ozzy. It has the voice of Jennifer. Spoiler alert! It has the voice of Jennifer Aniston, not the real Jennifer. I don't know. It might be her.
No,
it sounds just like her.
But it sounds just like her.
It sounds just like her. It's supposed to be her daughter years later, and it had that same fun Leprechaun feel to it. To me, that is a reboot. You're starting in within again the same lineage. Leprechaun Origins is an atrocity that is some weird type of remake. That's my viewpoint. There's lots of stuff that's not like, it's so undefinable.
Yeah.
That I am just like you. I am more confused now than when I started. What about this? These are things I still stand behind. I still stand behind thinking that, okay, here's a great one. Okay, I know I said I was wrapping up, but I'm gonna, here's an interesting one. Okay, so first Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the classic, the original. There was the 2, 3, and 4, which were weird sequels, to say the least. Some enjoyable for sure, but definitely not in the vein. They didn't feel at all like the first Texas Chainsaw. And then you get the modern day remakes, or whatever they are. The Andrew Bernarski version and its prequel. But then you get Texas Chainsaw 3D, which was a follow-up to the first one. Where would you say that? So in those, what is the Bernarski version and what is the Texas Chainsaw 3D Alexander Daddario version?
I would say the 3D would be probably the reboot.
Okay.
Because it follows that same, story plot or whatever, and it literally goes, it's like a Halloween 2. It's the same day as the first movie. The Andrew Bernarski, I would say is a gray area remake. Like we said,
I was literally going to choose those exact words. I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It's a gray area remake.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the only way to describe them, is there's so much gray area. So there's things that are exact remakes, like Night of the Living Dead, Psycho and stuff like that, Hills Have Eyes. But then you have gray area remakes. And that's one of the series that made me think. It was just like, well, Texas Chainsaw's gone all over the place. What is it? Halloween's gone all over the place too, but in the end, we're able to kind of sort it out. But Texas Chainsaw is another beloved franchise of mine that I'm like, well, where does it fit in the thought process? So I think the only other one I would probably say is the Omen remake. There's not a whole lot about it that, it's not better than the original. I think the original is a masterpiece that's super, super scary.
I did like that Liev Schreiber was in the remake. I'm a big fan of his. So.
Yeah, there's some great things about it, and I can understand, and it's told in contemporary time, modern times, so I can kind of understand now.
Sorry to cut you off, but it just came to my mind,
Sure.
Dawn of the Dead.
Oh yeah, we talked about it briefly. That is a great remake.
Yeah.
Because it leaves the original with that 70s George Romero flair, but then you have this new Zack Snyder version, which is like, put your foot on the gas and go and retell it in an early millennium storytelling way. And this is Zack Snyder in his good
pre-Justice League.
Pre-Justice League, pre-Batman versus Superman days. So it was it was an interesting experience to watch that and say it doesn't take away from the 70s Dawn of the Dead. It's its own wonderful, wonderful thing. So that's another great example. I think that's kind of along the lines of like the House on Haunted Hill. I am more confused now than when I started, but it has made me think a lot, and I'm going to continue off camera to think about and try to figure out this whole reboot remake thing. But this has been an absolute blast that's your word. He loves to say blast.
I love blast. Why are you taking
I know, I'm sorry, but
now what am I going to say?
I'm going to rob his word. I'm going to rob his word for now. It's been an absolute blast to try to figure this out. Although I will say my head hurts a little bit from trying to figure all this out, but it's been very enjoyable.
Very enjoyable.
to try. It's been a blast to try to figure all this out. But
we hope you guys at least enjoyed us trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
and discuss.
Hope you guys were the two of you that are
Yeah.
watching. We're right
Both
there
of you.
with us.
Yeah.
Both of you were right there with us, trying to.
The four of
this
us
whole
just
thing
figuring it out together.
But yeah, two of you on that side, two of us on this side. Do it together. Any closing words before we say goodbye until our next episode?
You know what? I just want to say that some things can be improved upon, some things can't.
That's a great way to end a Reboot Remake episode.
It's just some things just be left alone. Some things have been left alone, thank God, for now.
Yeah.
So, but ones we've talked about, I think we did it justice. And
that's the best way to end a Reboot Remake episode. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Next week and for the next few episodes, we are going to be going week by week. I do apologize for sometimes the 2-week gap. There are a lot of work sometimes to edit these, put things together, but our next few will be week after week. And next week's episode is what?
We're going to be wrapping up your take on the Friday the 13th series.
Wrapping up Friday the 13th all the way through part 9, because to me, part 9 is the end of the nostalgia years. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you guys.